Hi, so my name is Abhi Singh. Like Ken shared, I've been in the business for almost 30 years, and I'm one of the different folks that you're gonna ever probably speak at these things, because I've sat in your shoes. This is the first time I'm really on this side of the fence for the last year and a half, and I have a fundamentally different approach on market makers, order takers, and just run businesses, right? So I've had the good privilege and fortune to work with a lot of great organizations, like Ken mentioned, in every aspect, from credit manager to president, outside salesman to forklift driver. True story, I once drove a forklift through a brick wall. My safety guy loved me, so I have not held the role of a safety officer. But before we get started, I'd be remiss to not give you a shameless plug. I am a board member of the local chapter of the American Red Cross. There's a ton of people that need our help, with Helene, with Milton, with whatever else is coming down. So I'd ask you to please take a moment today, tomorrow, consider donating to the Red Cross, and let's help some folks out, all right? Especially the folks in North Carolina and in Florida. So in all those businesses I've run, one thing remains the same. Nothing happens until you sell something. Plain and simple, right? Notice it doesn't say nothing happens until you get an order for something. And that's a fundamental difference. And I think over time in our industry, whether it's traffic cones or toilets, it's lumber or it's lanyards, we've gotten a little bit soft from a sales perspective on how to sell. And if you think about it, you got to understand the why. Because once you figure out the why, the how-to is pretty simple. So my thought is, please, this is an interactive conversation. Feel free to disagree with me, throw a beer can at me, whatever you want to do, right? But if you remember 2007, 2008, right? We had this great economy going up, and then it just stopped. And then everybody in the industry had to survive. Unfortunately, a lot of great companies didn't survive. And what did we do that time? We let go of a lot of good people and a lot of future talent. And from 2007, 2008, call to about 2012-ish, give or take what sector you're in, we just fought our way through. Then 2012 hit, and we said, hey, the market's getting better. And really that wave, up or down for the most part, 2012 through 2021, was just an upward climb, right? You could stumble over an order. Everybody was growing, everybody was really recovering, and we were going fast, and we were taking profits, and life was great. But one thing we didn't do is we didn't recognize what would happen when that knowledge transfer starts to fade out of the business. So as people started retiring, we took the next person up and said, hey, you're an outside salesman. Go get them. Here's a set of car keys, a gas card, and you're allowed to take folks out for beers, right? People were great. And the market just kept on climbing. But what we didn't realize is that we had some market makers, some folks had long-term relationships, and we put the people in these spots and just let them roll. We never really told them the expectation. Just go out and do what Ken did when he was in your role, or go out and do what John did, or go out and do what Bob did. Call them the same people. And because of that, all the organizations that I've had the pleasure of working with over the last 8 or 10 years do one thing. They spend an exorbitant amount of time managing order takers and not being able to develop market makers. Show of hands in this room if you have any salesmen that you think could probably do a little bit better. Show of hands in this room if you have any salesmen you think are absolutely perfect and nothing needs to change. There you go. There you go. Who are you with? Enough said. So, story is one of my most recent engagements, and an organization I had the privilege to lead, came on board. It's about a $150 million distributor. And I won't say what line it was in because that'll give it away. But it was, from the outside, it looked fabulous, right? Come on board, $150 million, we're chatting, we're talking, and our ownership team says, we have the greatest sales team in the marketplace. Awesome. We have the greatest product in the marketplace. Even better. The bullshit meter started going off a little bit. And this is after I got hired, right? So I should have asked the right questions on that one. But all of a sudden, we get in and we start talking, and their sales had been flat to backwards for 4 to 5 years. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. So we started looking at the sales teams and really understanding what was driving, who was driving the product, and the niches and this and that. And out of 35 sellers, 8 of them made up 75% of our revenue. 6 of them made up 75% of our gross profit. That was a holy crap moment for me, right? I remember going home and talking to my wife. I'm like, you're not going to believe this. And that wasn't the hardest part about it. The hardest part was telling the ownership team, who thought they had the greatest sellers in the industry, hey, these are the facts. And the group before me, who did a wonderful job, talked about data and using data to evaluate your business. Clearly, these folks hadn't. So there was no magic bullet for me. I had to figure out what to do. And I'm like, oh man, right? One, I got to keep my job after telling our ownership team the sales team sucks. Number 2, I had to figure out how to keep my job without getting killed by our sales team when I told them they suck. And number 3, I had to figure out how to take these folks all the way through the cycle and get them to be more productive in what they do. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's not the first time I've had to do this. In fact, my last 5 roles has been the same playbook over and over and over and over and over again. I have a reputation in the industry of being the guy you call when you want to sell your business. After my 12-year-old son is now in his 11th house, my wife said that is done. You're not going to go work for anybody else anymore. So here we are. So let me get started and define the definition of a market maker. In short, and that's the Webster's definition of it with a little bit of editing, it's essentially somebody that can sell your product consistently to new business and new markets. Long story short, they grow. And they figure out how to grow, whether the market's up or the market's down. And we had a show of hands of people that said they had some good salespeople. And we had a show of hands of people that said they had some struggling salespeople. But if you ever notice, the good ones, man, the good ones, they can sell in any market. Deflation, inflation, market's up, market's down, it's hot, it's not. You have those 1 or 2 sellers that really go out and do things. And you wonder why that is, right? You wonder how those people do it. And essentially, look, we're not splitting atoms here. We don't have a really intense business. What we do have is distributor A or manufacturer A, which is everybody in this room. And they have a salesperson or their market maker. And they give that market maker the opportunity to sell goods and services to the marketplace. Now, what that market maker does with it is 100% up to them. They can go out, they can sell it here, they can sell it there, or they can just take an order. But the good ones that really grow in challenging times provide value, insight, and knowledge to their contractors or to their customers or to their dealers, right? They don't just say, hey, I got this really cool deck board. What color do you want? They say, here's the reason this deck board's better than every other deck board out there. More importantly, here's how it's going to solve your problems. And here's how it's going to put more money in your pocket, Mr. Contractor. That contractor then places his trust in that market maker. You can tell this is a really high-tech slide. Our marketing department didn't do this. So that's my Excel skills right there. But it puts that trust back in the market maker. Says, hey, I believe in that person. And that market maker delivers consistent growth to their employer or their ownership team. And that's the circle of our business. Y'all follow me so far? A couple heads nodding. I haven't put anybody to sleep yet. So I took a survey of 87 different distributors across every vertical before I came here. And I really want to get their thoughts on this. Because the last thing you want to do is come into something like this and have no data back up anything and have your own assumptions, right? So of those 87, we figured there was 30,000 different industry salespeople in their markets, across the country, coast to coast. The average compensation for their salespeople that they had, and again, this is water and sewer distributors, all the way up to lumber and dealers and everything in the middle, roofers, siding. Average compensation of an outside salesperson was $162,000 a year. And of that, only 10 to 20% of them considered their people market makers. Everyone was an order taker. Which ironically ties back to what I told you earlier about those 8 and those 6 of the 35, right? Just a weird number, and things keep coming back to that. So the question I have for you is, how much of this sounds like your business? And if it does, great. It's going to be solid 25, 30 more minutes. If not, you may fall asleep, so I apologize. Today, what we're going to talk about and really dive into is we've defined the difference between a market maker, order taker, the attributes of market makers, the attributes of order takers, why, because once you figure out the why, the how-to is pretty easy. They're critical for your business. Then actually give you a high-level playbook of what you can do to walk through and evaluate your own team. And all this stuff we're happy to send to you. Just shoot us an email. We'll send you any of the worksheets we have and go from there. So before we understand the difference of the market makers and the order takers, again, you got to look at yourself and say, am I really evaluating my team the way I should be? Because we all think we have the best team in the industry. And there's 8 or 9 different things that you walk through very simply to see. Number 1, order takers wait for the call. They have this large opportunity. It's fantastic. They're coming to you. They're beating up on your purchasing department, beating up on your vendors, hammer you. Hey, man, I need better pricing on this. I need more. I need to put all these resources towards it. Put this unbelievable bid package together. You follow up with them in a week. Hey, how's that order come? I don't know. Customer doesn't call me back yet. Any of y'all ever hear that? A couple of head nods in the back. You're actually smiling, so I think it happens a lot, right? Tony Robbins once said, an order taker can only sell what's asked for, which is right. Because he's not selling anything. He's order taking. He's waiting for the call, right? Number 2, they get wrapped around the axle on the little things, the tiny stuff. I actually had a salesman when I worked in the business in South Carolina that drove an hour and a half from Greenville, South Carolina, up to Charlotte to deliver a box of rebar caps. We had a branch in Charlotte. He could have just called the branch and just drop it off. But he drove an hour and a half because for him that was easier. That was the only value he provided for his customer. Make matters worse, on this large-scale project in Charlotte, we dropped off the rebar caps, whopping $22.10, but we didn't get any of the rebar. Einstein right there. Salesman of the year. Number 2, they can tell, but they can't ask. Again, they can only sell what's asked for. They can tell you all about any question you ask them, but they can't ask the hard questions. Where's John Perna at? John, I think you mentioned earlier one of the metrics you look at is what's the share of wallet you have with the customer. It amazes me how many salespeople who have relationships can't ask that question to the customer. They're uncomfortable. Were any of your salesmen like that when you first tried that out? Yeah, right? It's crazy. I got this relationship. He buys everything from me. Then you sit down, you figure it out, like, hey, out of the product we provide, how much of your spend comes to us? Like 5%. Salespeople are shocked. They're in fear. They're in shame. Sales manager who's with them is like, oh my God. The customer's like, you never asked me that before, dude. Come on. I buy all my rebar caps from you, but I buy the rebar from somebody else. They blame the market. Now, you heard some folks up here earlier who are much smarter than I am talk about markets and ups, downs, lefts, rights, this and that. And that's a great excuse for somebody that can't grow their sales, right? And that's why it's called an order taker or a market maker. Someone somewhere is buying something. The question is, what are you selling? And the great businesses, especially the independents, are very flexible at saying, hey, let's navigate with our customer. Because if they're buying something, and they're not buying what we have, but they need it, and we need to take a side step or two, how do we help them? Because they believe in us. Order taker's like, hey man, housing starts are down. Can't help you. And like, dude, you're not even in the residential business. What does it matter? They're ridiculously reactive. This ties in with number 1 a lot, right? They wait for the call, they wait for the call. Can't do anything, I'm waiting for them to call me back, or I got to drop my pricing because my competitor did, right? Fantastic. Well, your competitor is going to get there 2 weeks from Tuesday, and the customer needs it tomorrow, but you're going to drop your pricing? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to your value proposition. And they never have the support, right? Inside sales guy didn't drop the ball. He didn't deliver it. He didn't take my order. Well, you never called him to tell him. Did you tell him it needs to be there Tuesday on the job site? No, you should have known that. And don't get me started on the purchasing guy, right? Because we can never buy right. We don't have the right pricing in the marketplace. We don't have the right cost. You never hear that we buy really good, do you? Because if you do, I need to talk to you guys, right? Those are the salespeople like, hey, our guys did a great job. Now, let me compare and contrast that over here with a market maker. They're proactive. They're race cars on dirt tracks. You can't hold them back. They're going out, they're calling the customers. One guy that we have is, and you'll hear about him here in a few minutes, he would call a customer within 5 minutes of sending them the quote. Sound a little annoying? Probably. But what did that do? It gave him an opportunity to talk to that customer and walk through line by line by line every quote he sent them. Now, these are obviously meaningful quotes, right? It's not for 1 or 2 line items. But he did that and nobody else did. And that was a differentiator. And it got to the point where the customer said, hey, I got your quote. Call me back at 4:30. And let's go over your quote with our competitors' quotes. And they would walk through, and he would go through it. And the customer used him as a compare and contrast. Price never came up after that because he was the trusted resource, because he was proactive. Doing so built a relationship that was like glue. Those guys became best friends. They did everything together. And more importantly, it wasn't just with that one customer. It was with his book of business across the board, right? He was tied into that entire deal because he was solving a problem. And in that business, the problem was, how do I tell if this quote and this quote with such generic product X is good or bad? And what's the difference? It's almost like a chat GPT like we talked about, right? You put it in the field meter and it comes right back out. By solving those problems, he was able to sell possibilities the customer never imagined. He saved them so much time, helped them figure out different ways to grow their business, and change every product that they had. Because the key is, market makers help customers succeed. And they understand by helping customers succeed, they succeed. And by them succeeding, they're able to have their organization succeed. And everybody, the salesperson, the ownership team, the inside, the outside folks, the drivers, purchasing folks, they all build more money. They appreciate the team because they consider themselves the A team. They consider themselves the best in the marketplace, and they can back it up because they have quantifiable data to say, here's why we're better. I heard someone say on time and full and complete earlier today. I heard someone say 98% fill rates, higher margins than the market. And how do your vendors tell if you're the best team in the marketplace? How much of their product are you buying? So everybody can say, yeah, that's the premier distributor in that marketplace. And they love to get better. So part of our business is a sales training company, but we're probably like nothing like you've ever seen. There's a ton of great organizations out there. The Hartmans of the world, the David Rubensteins of the world, the Rick Davis of the world. I mean, they're out there for awesome. Those guys are phenomenal. I believe in them so much, I sent some of my people there. They're like college. We're like 8th grade. We're going to get you up there and get you going to be able to qualify into that deal. I have a good friend of mine. Anybody here in the safety business, industrial safety, harnesses, fall protection? All right. So a good friend of mine, George Stallings. If you imagine George, he's built like Kevin Hart, thinks he looks like Shaq, right? And he's phenomenal. One of the greatest true individual sellers I've ever met in my life. And about 17 years ago now, he started his rep agency, Sales Solutions, on the East Coast. And they sell all fall protection. They are everything fall protection. They are the masters. If you need some, give them a call. Happy to connect you. But they built it to about $100 million, and they're still going. And we're talking about some of his sales training. and he needs something. I connected him with Bradley Hartman. And as we were talking, he said, hey, man, I'm so sick of my customers, which would be distributors, training their salespeople to be waiters and waitresses. I'm like, what do you mean? Because they all train to be order takers. They send them all to other places, and they just come back, and all they can do is take an order. Because I need something from my new people that will do something different like that. He and Hartman hit it off. You know Bradley, he does a great job. They hit it off. He's sending his folks there, and they're off to the races. So market makers love that training opportunity. They absolutely love it because it makes them better, not only in their professional life, it makes them better in their personal life. And that's what it all ties to, right? How do I build this crazy industry we're in and tie it all into my personal life and balance it, right? And figure it all out. It's not easy. Definitely, and everyone in this room sure as heck knows it's not easy. They think profit, not revenue. They think profit, not revenue. That's a critical thing. In the business I told you about earlier with the 8 of 35 sellers accounting for 75% of our revenue, 60% and 75%, my bad. Every day we got a sales sheet. And we ranked and stacked and ranked all of our salespeople, but there was nothing about profit on there. So we had our people walking around beating their chests, they were killing it. I'm selling XYZ a year. I'm like, but you're making like $9, dude. Come on. So one day, miraculously, we just shifted the game. This is the start of a new month. We took off the revenue dollars and just put profit dollars on. And man, did that leaderboard change. It's like my Cleveland Browns last year being awesome, almost in the playoffs, and this year, well, I'm not going to talk about it, but they're not very good. So people started thinking that way. And you know what? Once we changed the mindset, because really nobody likes change. Change is just saying, hey, you're really doing a good job but not doing the things I want you to do. You got to remotivate, realign. We changed that mindset. We realigned that mindset. All of a sudden, those top performers came right back up to the top because they got the game. They figured out what we wanted them to do. And that's important for later on in this conversation. But that was very important for them to be able to say, hey, I'm the best in this organization. I'm going to prove myself to be the best. And they ended up doing it. And lastly, and I think this is one of the most important keys, they never drive by turned dirt. They see every job site they figure out, and they drive by it. And this isn't just salespeople, I don't think. In fact, I think there's a CFO I used to work with who goes out on the weekends with his dogs and drives by every job site to make sure that his salespeople are on that stuff. CFO you should hire. If you want to hook up, I'm happy to hook you up with him as well. But you'll note the name up there. The guy's name is Greg Rayfield. And Greg Rayfield is by no means Tony Robbins. Greg Rayfield played outside linebacker, East Carolina, in probably mid-'80s. He was my first president general manager I ever worked with at Ferguson Enterprises in 1999. I was a superstar credit manager coming in, going to change the world in the shittiest market we had. And Greg had just moved from, I believe, Charlotte, North Carolina. Oh, I'm sorry, Tampa. Tampa to San Diego. You want to talk about a culture shock. And Greg's a big, burly guy, right? Yells, screams, big Southern accent, talks like this. F words, everything out of his mouth, every other word. And he goes into San Diego. And what Greg didn't realize is he had these beautiful offices. Imagine this is his office, right? And here's his desk. And your chair's here, but the way to walk in is here. So number one, everybody could see what was on his computer screen. Not the sharpest stick. He played outside linebacker. Got hit in the head too many times. But also, everybody could see who he was talking to. And about 3 or 4 times a day, I was in his office getting absolutely reamed. Because I deserved it, but 2, it was kind of fun, right? Just watching him get angry. And he would take these glasses. If you remember back in the 90s, the glasses you could twist, like the Flexiframes, and he would throw them at you and this and that. So one day, he's yelling at me because, again, I was early in my career. I was a credit manager. Didn't fully understand the sales process. He goes, get in my car. We're going for a ride. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get killed in the middle of the San Diego desert somewhere, right? And he drove by every job site, and made sure 3 things happened. Number 1, I learned the importance of customers and how to work with them. Number 2, now this is the present general manager of roughly a $100 million business in 1999. Number 2, he made sure every plumbing contractor on that job had his card in case there was a problem. Don't call me for pricing, don't call me for product. If you have a problem with my people, let me know. And number 3, he made sure he gave opportunities for his folks that weren't able to get by those job sites. Pretty cool. A lot of time spent, but pretty cool way to do that. And that's when I understood the importance of never driving by turn dirt for anybody in an organization, especially if it's a job you don't know. Now, I challenge you to think about your team and truly be honest with yourself, right? Really be honest with yourself. Your people order takers or market makers. And as we go through the next couple slides, we're about 3/4 of the way done. You'll be able to walk through. I'll take you through 2 real-life examples of time with a market maker and time with an order taker. And hopefully you can tell the difference in the 2. So a company I recently joined, I shouldn't say recently, in the last 10 years. Again, best people in the industry, best products, and their best relationships were just flat. Couldn't figure it out. We found 23 sellers, 4 years of flat growth, negative or less than 2% growth, and flat margins, I should say. 87% of their salespeople, or 20 order takers, were 60 and 35. 3 market makers accounted for 40% of the revenue, 65% of the profit dollars. That's an even worse situation than I talked about earlier, right? And these are the organizations that I've had the pleasure to work with. We took the same process you're going to see in the next few minutes throughout the organization, a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of convincing, and we ended up doubling the business of that, doubling the revenue and gross profit in about 18 months, pentupling EBITDA by 5 in 18 months, and sold it for almost a double-digit multiple. So there's a rationale and there's a reason to do it. So we talked about the attributes of a market maker, and these are the slides I was telling you I'll send you. It's not rocket science, folks. We took our people, we figured out what attributes do we want our people to have, right? And we listed them down, and they all tend to be the same things. And we took our salespeople and we circled each one, and basically gave a scorecard for our salespeople. And we said, what don't we want them to have? What don't we want them to do? And that became the attributes of an order taker. And we did the same thing. What do they have? What do we want them to have? And we compared them, and we put everybody out. And then we said, how do we take somebody that has limited relationships to someone that's a relationship builder? How do we have somebody that hates follow-up to be proactive? And every person was different. Again, it's a lot of heavy lifting. But we got through it, and we shifted that balance. Because what happens is when you have sales teams, you find out they kind of blend into each other. There's a gentleman named Dan Clark. If you haven't had the opportunity to see him speak, he is amazing. One of my mentors and my friends, just a super, super unbelievable human being. And he wrote a book called The Art of Significance. And one of his key themes is we become the average of the 5 people we spend most of our time with. We become the average of the 5 people we spend most of our time with. Case in fact, I've got 4 fraternity brothers that are absolute morons. Every time I go back home to Ohio, my wife's like, good Lord, just don't go to jail, don't kill anybody, and please, for the love of God, don't try to steal a boat. True story on the last one. So when I'm with them, I kind of go downhill a little bit. When I'm with brilliant folks like this, you learn, you get better, right? You learn something you take out of it. Same thing happens to your sales teams. If you have 4 order takers and 1 market maker, that 1 market maker is going to be like, man, I'm good. He's going to walk around like he's Lawrence Taylor back in the day, and the rest of the team's going to bring him down a little bit. Versus if you have the inverse, you have 4 market makers and 1 order taker. What's going to happen to that order taker? Inherently, he's going to learn and get better and rise to the occasion. So again, why is all this important? Realizing that once you figure out the why, the how-to's not too hard. Depends what's important to you. Everybody in this room has a different idea on what they want to do with their business, whether you are a salesperson, you're an owner, you are a manager, anywhere in the middle, where do you want your business to be? The key is understanding what's important to you and why, and figuring out the how-to and how to get there. So real life story, market maker number one, guy named Phil. Phil was recruited into an organization to run an unbelievable branch in a major metro. He was given a wonderful Cinderella ball of BS. He thought he was walking into this 60,000 square foot building. He walked into a building that didn't look too much different like this. Actually, the pictures on the right is an actual picture of his branch. The other two are a pretty good resemblance because I couldn't give it away. And Phil's a stud. Anybody here watch Yellowstone? You know this guy? So Phil's a lot like Rip, but he's got the temper of this guy, right? You put them together and that's Phil. And he is loyal as they come, and he is as good as they come, but man, he's intense. So he's in this deal. He's moved about 1,000 miles away, brought his wife up there with him. And he's like, man, what do I do? He could have shriveled into a hole and died, and a couple of the folks that we recruited with him did do the same thing. They just kind of like, I'm out. They said, no, I'm going to figure something out because I got to make this work because I don't lose. I make markets. And he had everything stacked against him. I mean, everything. We had a rebar fabrication machine that was outside, so no matter what a customer needed, if it rained, he couldn't do anything. It's Atlanta. It rains. Tough luck, man. Guys will have to go somewhere else. That was the mentality he walked into. So first thing he did, he built relationships. Not only with his customers, with his internal team, to figure out the why. Because again, once you figure out the why, the how-to is pretty simple. What do we want to do here? Do we want to sit in this branch all day and when it rains do nothing, or do we figure stuff out, right? He thought strategically. I got this dump of a building. It's got an 8-foot clear height. There's stuff all over the place. So he got everybody working together, cleaned it up, and took some pride in it. It might be a crap hole, but man, that was their crap hole after about a year. I mean, they took some pride in that stuff. They were polishing the floors. It was unbelievable. Galvanized the goal, and the goal was simple. He made me, when I joined the organization, he said, if I will you. And the if I was, if I get to a certain level in profit, will you get us a new branch? And I was like, dude, I'm going to get you a new branch regardless. But yeah, let's go with that. If you do this, I'll do that, right? Said, all right. Galvanized the team around it, got a goal, started looking for buildings before they even got anywhere near it, but everybody was pushing forward. They were growing. They were figuring out things differently. They were holding each other accountable. They had that care factor, right? He negotiated well. We couldn't ship anything out of that yard, so what do? He figured out a way to negotiate with vendors or competitors in other markets that do his stuff and just ship it for him to get that top line volume rolling and minimal profit margin, but with no operating expense with it. Became a trusted resource. The gentleman I told you about that calls people up 5 minutes after every quote, goes through it. Drove resiliency. I mean, he braced the suck because that branch sucked. It was miserable. But they got through it. Got through the hard times. Focus on solutions. All this should sound almost nauseatingly familiar because it's all the stuff we talked about earlier. Focus on solutions for his customers. How can we get that for you? Then solutions to the problem that they built. We got all this business. How do we do it? And he made it rain. In 1 year, he grew the business by almost a little bit over $9 million, added another $3.4 million in gross profit to it. Day one, when he joined, he was a $4.8 million business, 26% margins, and a rocking EBITDA. You get more than that in a Bank of America money market checking account. Month 18, results speak for itself. And that branch went from the worst to one of the best back and forth, tied for markets for number one. And in the organization, hey man, that whole team is just annihilating it. Couldn't be prouder of them. And they did it on their own. Now let me compare and contrast that business I ran, which is more in the space. Salesman named Wade. And Wade had an exact opposite story of Phil. He had an awesome branch. I mean, you could eat off the floors, right? It looked like a Costco. Everything nice in its place. Ridiculous amount of fleet. But Wade wasn't so much Rip or Happy Gilmore. He was more Tommy Boy in the beginning and thought he was Jordan Belfort. And he really did. So when I joined this organization, I had the opportunity to ride with Wade. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. I want to see what this guy's all about. And he's in, call it the top 25 market, or one of the top 25 markets in the United States. Not 20, not 25, somewhere in the middle. So we go on the sales ride. And before I started talking to Wade, I'm talking to our district manager that ran that market. I'm like, hey, give me the story on this guy. Everybody else is growing. It's a highly, highly inflationary time, and you guys can figure out the timeline. Everything is going out the shelf. Nobody can get things fast enough. Building's booming. But Wade's kind of flattish, right? Not really, kind of treading water. Excuse me. And I'm like, hey, he's in a tough market. Okay. Markets are lifting. High water raises all boats. He's like, well, you know, he's just struggling. So I go on a sales call with Wade. And this was one and only sales call I went on Wade with. Walk in this branch, or in this business, excuse me. He meets with the owner. Hey, how's the family? What's going on? How's everything at home? In the market we're in, you have to obviously socialize with people because you're building a relationship with. But he didn't know the guy's wife's name. He'd been calling on him for 5 years. Didn't know how many kids he had. Didn't know what he was into. So he just pulled the first 3 things he could think about. Awesome. Way to go. So that was 5 minutes. Another 5 minutes. Is there anything I can quote you on? No, I'm good. Are you sure? Yeah, man, I'm good. Goes back to talking about, well, I like what you did with your office. All right, because he was taught somewhere along, look at people's offices, build a relationship. He then says, do you mind if I go out and do an inventory check on your shelves for you? He's like, all right. So we get out, and I'm walking. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I'm in the twilight zone. So we go out, we're counting shelves. Awesome. 45 minutes. Come back. He's like, yeah, this, and this. Oh, thanks, man. I buy those from your competitor. I'll make sure I get him a PO. Awesome. I'm glad I could help. And we're out the door. And I remember sitting there going, good God. So we have a very, very, very constructive conversation. Like, help me understand why you do this. Because, again, once you figure out the why, the how-to is pretty easy on how to fix it. He goes, that's all we do around here. That's how we sell. I'm like, dude, that's not selling. I could replace you with a ChatGPT and figure it out, right? But that was his way of going about it. So if you think about it, what did Wade do? He waited for an ask, compare and contrast to Phil, who was ridiculously proactive. He thought it about today only. He wanted a PO for that day, which he didn't get much of. But he also didn't think about the future. God forbid you ask a customer, what do you have coming up? What jobs are you working on? How can I help? Novel concept to him. He focused on price. When he said, I buy this product, and it was spray paint, from your competitor, he said, oh, what do they charge you? I'll beat the price by 50 cents. I'm like, oh my goodness, right? He didn't question anything other than price. Didn't want to know why he bought from the competitor. Didn't know what about that competitor that you're buying from. Could they do better so I can sell you that piece? I can sell you what I do, which isn't the product, it's my service, it's me. Nothing learned. He followed the usual script because it's how he's always done it. And I don't know where in our industry, no matter what vertical you're in, that became the standard quo, but good Lord, it's stuck around, hasn't it? He didn't want to piss off the buyer. His words, not mine. I didn't want to make him angry by pushing him too hard. Obviously didn't cross or upsell. I should sell. Change that to he didn't sell anything. And he lost share. Over the next year, his revenue dropped by 40%. He had negative growth in a high inflationary period. Margins dropped by over 500 basis points, and his competitors grew. Wade became one of our best, least busy inside salesmen in about 8 months. So, and now I think he's doing something else outside the industry, and he's thriving, which is good for him. So those are my 2 real-life examples. And I'm a child of the 80s, so anytime I can work G.I. Joe in, I try to. Going forward, and we're almost done here, question you guys should have is, hey, I get it. I understand what I need to do. How do I transform my team? First thing you do is email us. We'll send you those slides. No charge, no obligation. You don't have to call us. Prefer if you did, but you don't have to. And remember, it's not rocket science. Definitely is not. But I'll tell you what it's not. On top of that, it's not more training. It's not another book. It's not, spending more time and with my salespeople and giving them new books of business, right? Because some of that is true, but it comes back to you taking a hard look in the mirror and understanding what you want. Because as we talked about earlier, those salespeople from 2007 to 2012 where we had that giant gap, and we put these people in these roles, and they grew, and they grew, and they grew, thinking they did everything great. Did we ever really set the expectation of the role of an outside salesperson? To get your nose dirty in a bar fight against your competitors and prove your value, or are you just going to sit there and watch? And that starts with us, all the way at the top of the organization, all the way down. Because it's got to go from your salespeople to your sales managers, if you have them, to your sales leaders, to the person that you hire. Then it's also got to team up with your HR person. What attributes do we want in these people we're bringing in? Because I don't know about you, I've hired some great salespeople that were interviewed well, and they sucked. Right? Number 2, evaluate your team. Where you sit today, spend the time. I trust you. It'll be well worth your time to sit down, and whether it's our tool or something else, just to sit down and go through, do these people have the attributes I want to? And if it's yes, fantastic. Build on that. Those are the folks you send to the trainings, like the Hartmans, the Davises, or whoever else it is, right? But if they're not, figure out how you get them there. And the tougher question that you have to ask yourself is, can I get them there? Now you figure that out, you set the standard. You raise the bar. We had a saying in quite a few businesses I ran, we are not going to participate in a down market. Let everybody else play in the down market. We're going to go up. We're going to grow. And that's a tough message you hear. The first time you say it, someone thinks you're crazy. Second time, someone actually asked me if I'd been drinking. Third time is people started to get the hang of it. We're not going to participate in a down market. And you heard very flattish stuff today. You heard up and down on inflation or deflation, depending what product you really sell. So are you going to let that happen? Review how you pay your people. And gentlemen, I had the pleasure of working with for a couple years, Jim Sobek, had this great line. If you know Jim, he's extremely politically correct. If you pay for peanuts, you'll get monkeys. Give people the opportunity to earn, plain and simple. Because the more they make, the more you make, especially if they're on straight commission. Redeploy your order takers. Same gentleman I told you about in San Diego, Greg Rayfield, had 9 outside salespeople, 4 inside salespeople, this beautiful office in San Diego, no one was ever in there. He pulled all his outside folks inside. As of today, you're no longer an outside salesperson. We'll pay you the same, your accounts call, Because in San Diego, or all of California, even though it's a different country, what do you deal with? Traffic. If you're lucky, 2, maybe 3 sales calls a day in Southern California. If it's surfing, or the surf's up, you're not getting any sales calls, right? Put them all inside. Customers called. Their sales went up. Profitability went up. Expenses went down. Shocker. So there's a role for your order takers. They're not bad. They're just not in the right spot. Recruit and develop your people. Once you set that standard of what you want, don't settle for anything less. And like I said earlier, send your best people to these training sessions. Let them go because they're going to eat it. Sending an order taker to an expensive training session is like sending Helen Keller to flight school. It's not a good investment. Oh, that one felt pretty flat. I thought it was a better response than that. Good grief. And then lastly, get the hell out of the way. Right? We all talk about our salespeople and how we want them to do things and manage and execute and be able to grow their business. But at a certain point, it's not about you. It's about them. Let them develop and grow. Right? Give them the tools, give them the resources, give them the opportunity to live the life of their dreams, and then get out of their way. And it's up to you. It comes back up to you. I'm going to close this one personal story. So this whole thing that we talked about is not just about your professional life. It's also your personal life. Same type of concept. Whether it's raising your kids or whatever you do. So, October 2019, I go to the doctor with my wife. I sit down with this doctor, Dr. Muther. Had to shake him left-handed because he didn't have a right arm. Really weird. True story. And he says, hey, you're an organ failure. You're going to need a transplant. Kidney transplant. Are you kidding me? Shocker. Kind of changes your perspective, especially when you have a 7-year-old son. Go back home. I'm like, oh, shit, that sucks. And I sat down, talked to my wife, like, what are we going to do? You know, Thanksgiving, we get on the UNOS list. The day before Thanksgiving, we let the letter. I'm like, hey, sweet, we're on the list. It says it's going to be 5 years, right? So I'm like, all right. That time, I was 43 years old. Sitting there, I'm like, oh, this really sucks. And I'm looking at my kid, and my wife and I are lamenting a little bit. And my 7-year-old, right? For those of you that know my son, he's me times 7, and he's an amazing human being. He's like, Dad, you're being a victim, man. Quote, unquote, I'll never forget it. He goes, you're being an order taker, Dad. Start making markets and find an organ. Shit, I'm a 7-year-old, right? All right. My wife and I get to work. We start cranking things out, get a website, get some social media, get everything you can imagine to raise awareness for kidney disease. And by the way, 1 in 37 million Americans have kidney disease, or that's 1 out of every 7. So check your beans. Seriously, check your beans. All kinds of resources out there. Really happy to talk to you about that. I talked about 40 to 50 people a quarter helping them through it. Long story short, we get the word out. And one thing that really humbled me, especially in our industry, is how people take care of each other. Like we talked about Colleen, we talked about Milton. People take care of each other. On average, when you put the word out to get a kidney transplant, you get maybe 8 to 10 different people to sign up and say, hey, here's what's going to happen, right? I will be a donor. And they don't tell you how many people sign up or who it is. They just tell you how many blood pressure monitors they send out. So I'm a competitive guy. I'm like, hey, I need to get the most blood pressure monitors sent out, right? But how do I convince somebody to say, hey, do me a favor. Can you go to the doctor and get your stomach sliced open and lose an organ for me? Especially since we haven't talked in 8 or 10 years. So go through that. Turns out 93 people by Christmas had offered to donate an organ or get tested to donate an organ to me. That'll bring you down to earth, right? Don't know the names, you can figure it out when they start calling you saying, hey, I got this blood pressure monitor. Pretty cool. And again, you're still on the wait list because you've got to get tested. So you go out and you make markets. At the end of the day, February 18th, 2020, my mother's birthday, I ended up getting my kidney transplant, start to finish, 90 some days, 100 some days. So you can take what we talked about earlier, apply it to your personal life. You can sit and wait for shit to happen to you, or you can go out and make things happen. Again, it's up to you. Everybody in this room has the same opportunity as the person next to them. And with that, thank you for your time.